YouTube, so I won't. Oh, now we are. Okay, so now we're live on YouTube. I would like to. What do we say? I would like to wish all of you Tashidere. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whichever it happens to be. And to begin, I just would like to let all of you know that Khenchen Trangpa Rinpoche has been giving the transmissions of the Indian texts on Mahamudra, and tonight, after he finishes his transmission, or this tomorrow, in the morning of the 26th, it'll be 10 a.m. Nepal time, and the 26th, there'll be a birthday ceremony for the Gyalwang Karmapa, led by Rinpoche, and we all get to watch Rinpoche say a few prayers, make a mandala offering, cut a cake, and things like that. So if you would like to join to see Rinpoche do that, you can either participate in the transmission, and then just keep watching, or you can look later. Now, where is the? I have the information on my phone in my room as to where you actually go. I think if you look at the Trangpa Media channel on Facebook or something like that, you should be able to get it. So 10 a.m. Nepal time is 9:15 Pacific time. For those of you in Europe, it's going to be what, 5 or 6 in the morning? Something like that, right?
Excuse me, Khenpo, is that today or tomorrow, Pacific?
Well, you're in Pacific time, so it's our today. It's our tonight.
Tonight, okay, thank you. I'll let
Pacific time, it is 9:15 p.m. tonight.
Thank you.
Eastern time, it would be 12:15 a.m. in the middle of the night. And European time, then England would be 5 hours after that, 5:15, right? Then Europe is 6 or 7, something like that. Anyways, you're all welcome to join us. And then, because I'll have stayed up late until like 10 o'clock watching that, I won't be able to teach a class tomorrow. We're also having puja tomorrow anyway, so no class tomorrow. So that is the scheduling announcement. So now let us begin by, what do we say? Let's begin with a good motivation by going for refuge and rousing bodhicitta. So please recite the words of the prayer for going for refuge and bodhicitta with thinking about the meaning as you say the words. O sangye chodan tsoge chonam la chancho bardo dane chapsum che dage chönyen gibe sanam je rola penjer sanje robar sho Sangye chedan tsoge chonam la chandra parado dane chapsum che dage chenyen gibe sanam gidola penjir sanje drobar sho sangye chedan tsoge chonam la Chancho bardo dane chapsum che dage chenyen gibe sanam gidola penjir sanje drobar sho until enlightenment I go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and the sublime Sangha. By the merit of my listening to the Dharma, may I reach Buddhahood to benefit beings. Semjen tamji dewa tan dewi judan dembra jurji donga dan donga ji judan rawa jurji donga mebe dewa tamba tan min rawa jurji neden shada nitan rawa tanyon shembola nebra jurji. May all sentient beings be happy and have the causes of happiness. May they be free of suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be parted from the highest joy, free of suffering. May they dwell in the great equanimity, free of attachment or hatred for those near or far. Now please think to yourselves that we must bring all of our mothers, all sentient beings throughout space, to the state of completely perfect Buddhahood. And in order to bring all sentient beings to Buddhahood, we ourselves must reach that state. And so please listen to the Dharma with that motivation of wishing to become a Buddha, the motivation of bodhicitta. The Dharma that we are listening to is the Treasury of Abhidharma by Vasubandhu, as explained by Wanchak Dorje in his commentary, Youthful Play. And of the 8 chapters, we were discussing the 6th, the teachings on the path and individuals. And this chapter has 3 topics: an explanation of the path, explanations of individuals, and an explanation of the specific explanations of the paths, or you could say explanations of the specifics of the paths. So we will, so today we are speaking about the first, the explanations of the paths. The explanation of the paths has 4 topics: the link between chapters, the essence of the paths, the focus of the paths, and how the paths arise. And we are speaking about the 4th, how the paths arise. So there are 2 parts to that. There's the 2 topics to that: the overview of how to enter the path, an explanation of how to meditate. The explanation of how to meditate then has the attributes of the support, the meditator, and the stages of the path one meditates on. And we're speaking about the second, the stages of the path. In particular, we're talking about the path going from the path of accumulation, where you're meditating upon the 4 foundations of mindfulness, then the path of joining with its 4 stages, and that's the section where we're at now. In general, though, that's the insight meditation, but there are the methods of tranquility meditation and methods for insight meditation. So we're speaking about insight meditation. And in the past section on insight meditation, there are the 3 topics of the path of accumulation, the 4 foundations of mindfulness, the path of joining, and the path that directly realizes the truths. So we're speaking about the second, the path of joining. But before I get to that, I'd like to first address a question that came up, because yesterday, in speaking about tranquility meditation, we were speaking about the tranquility meditation of mindfulness of breathing. So the 6 characteristics, or the 6 techniques of counting, placing, considering, counting, following, placing, closely considering, causal modifying, and completely purifying. So these 6 different steps. And here in the text, it says these are only Buddhist practices. They're not non-Buddhist practices. And so the questioner is asking, well, can't non-Buddhists practice shamatha or shine in Tibetan tranquility meditation? Isn't it taught that they can also teach tranquility meditation, or that they can also practice tranquility meditation? And yes, they can. What's being talked about here is a specific type of shamatha meditation. As you think about, like in the instructions in our Kagyu lineage, we have tons of instructions of different types of tranquility meditation. There is meditation with support, without support. There's meditation with attributes, without attributes, and all sorts of different techniques. There's backwards meditation. There's all sorts of different types of meditation. So here, this is one set of techniques, the techniques of tranquility meditation, and of meditating on the breath. So what Vasubandhu is saying is that here, these specific techniques are Buddhist techniques. The non-Buddhists don't have them. So in particular, like counting and following and placing and so forth, these are Buddhist techniques of meditation, especially when you start looking at the later ones. And the counting is pretty, I think, actually these days now almost anyone who meditates is going to start by counting the breath. It's become such a popular way of meditating. But the later stages are like looking at what is the breath made of. And so there's a little bit of insight there, right? Examining what are they made out of, what are the constituents and so forth. So that's specifically Buddhist. But even at the time of Vasubandhu, certainly, the Great Exposition, then even that, counting the breath, was a specifically Buddhist meditation. When you think about like the yoga meditations on the breath, they're like breathing in, holding, counting how long you're breathing and so forth, or breathing very rapidly or so forth, holding the breath for a certain period of time, a certain number of counts and so forth. So that's a little bit different in its focus and it's in its technique than this. So this is just saying that they're specifically Buddhist techniques. At that time they were. Nowadays, counting is, I think, a fairly universal technique for practicing shamatha meditation. So now where we left off yesterday is we had talked about the path of joining. The second we have first, it's a little bit different in its focus and its tech. Okay, so we've got 4 stages on the path of joining. I just want to go through these because I think this is probably relatively new for you. So when you get to the path of joining, basically you're getting stronger and stronger meditation. So you divide it up into 4 main stages. And these are warmth, where you're first feeling like a little bit like you're getting close to the path of seeing. The path of seeing is like a blazing fire. So this is like you're just starting to get those fire sticks that you're rubbing together. They're just starting to get warm. And then they get warmer and warmer, and then you get to what's called the peak. And the peak is because it's like the greatest of the unstable virtues. So there is stable and unstable virtue. An unstable virtue is like, you can fall back. So when you're on the peak, you could still regress and fall into the lower realms. So it's unstable virtue. It's a virtue, but it's not quite stable yet. Then you get to the level of forbearance. The level of forbearance, then your virtue is stable in that you are not going to fall into the lower realms. Now your virtue is still defiled. You're not at the undefiled level yet. You're still defiled, but you're not going to fall into the lower realms. So therefore it is a more stable meditation. And we divide this into 3 stages. Actually, the first 2 are also divided into 3 stages, but those aren't mentioned in the text directly. There are 3 stages: the lesser, medium, and greater. And the lesser and the medium are like phases where it's getting stronger and stronger. And then the greater stage of forbearance is like it's really, really strong. It's not like the fire hasn't yet ignited, but you're getting close. And it's 1 moment long. And then that leads into the 4th stage of the path of joining, which is called supreme worldly dharmas. The reason it is called supreme worldly dharma is because this is the greatest state, the supreme state that you can have in a supreme worldly state before you become a noble being. This is the greatest time. So it's called the supreme worldly dharma. That also is only a moment because it's like the fire is just about to light. When it lights, then you're on the path of seeing, or what we will discuss today, the 16 moments of clear realization. So we haven't got to those yet. We will get to them this morning. So we were speaking about we spoke about all 4 of those yesterday. So now they all have some common features. And so that is the spot where we are in the text, which is in the book. It's on the bottom of page 447. If I wanted you all to be reading the books, I'm not sure should be showing you all the all the screenshots all the time, but it seems like modern technology, we have to use it. If you like books, that's good. Anyways, the common features, this is a section Roman numeral, little Roman numeral 5. They are all 5 aggregates without attainments, the 4 precursors to realization. So they are all, that means all 4 of these stages, warmth, peak, forbearance, and supreme worldly dharma, are all 5 aggregates. They're the five aggregates because it's your mind, and they're all happening on levels of equipoise. So there's also the undefiled vow, and you may well also already have like the lay or the monastic precepts. So those would be like the aggregates of the aggregate of forms. So you have all five aggregates, but not the attainments. The attainment of those are not considered the actual path of joining. They're separate. They're a little bit separate. And the reason is that after you finish the path of joining, you've still attained it. You still have it, but it's no longer manifest because you've achieved the path of seeing and then the path of meditation. So there's no need to have a manifest path of joining anymore. It's kind of inferior. You don't need it, but you've still attained it. So you've got it. So you've got the attainments. So that's why they say that the attainments are not the actual path of not the actual path of joining. And these four stages are called by a name called the four precursors to realization. That means that there are four stages that lead to realization. A precursor is something that comes before, right? In English, this is the English word. It's a translation of a Sanskrit word, sabhagya, which is like the coming before, something that leads to something. So actually here in Tibetan, when they translated this into Tibetan, this term sabhagya, they translated it as chatun. So chatun, this is an interesting word. Cha means apart, and tun means like similar or concordant with. So people translate these as the partial concordance with penetration. And it does match the literal meaning, and there is a description, Vasubandhu does describe this word with that exact meaning, but it's not very communicative in English, and so I prefer the term precursor, which sort of shows what's leading to, that's what's bringing it on, that's what's leading to it. And then realization versus penetration, it seems like realization is clearer towards the meaning. So that's the root text. So the four stages of the path of joining are all inherently the foundations of mindfulness. So as we spoke about, the foundations of mindfulness are all five aggregates. Actually, the foundations of mindfulness include all phenomena when you look at them on a broader way through connection and focus and so forth. So because they're all the foundations of mindfulness, they are all primarily full knowing or prajna and its associations. That means all the mental factors and consciousnesses that are associated with prajna. They're also equipoise because they're on the levels of either the preparations or the actual formless. So they have an imperceptible form. So for that reason, they are the five aggregates. The imperceptible form, to remind you, is when you have a vow, a restraint, and then you have the form of that restraint according to the great exposition. It's an imperceptible, you can't see it, it doesn't produce any consciousness, but it's there. So you can get these either by taking a vow, like by taking the five lay precepts or the monastic vows, but you can also gain it by, you can also gain them through meditation, because it's actually the nature is that you're restraining from action. That restraint has an imperceptible form. So for that reason, that is the path, the four stages of the path of joining are the five aggregates. They're without attainments, and this is the issue I was just talking about. The attainment, to remind you in the great exposition, is a separate quality than the thing. When you have something, then you also have its attainment. But the attainments are not included as warmth in the others because the nobles have the attainments in a manifest way. If the attainments were the actual quality, then it would follow that the nobles would also manifestly have warmth in the others, but they don't. They've gone beyond them. They don't need them anymore. So in this way, warmth, the peak, forbearance, and supreme dharma are the four precursors to clear realization. The four things that lead to clear realization. They're kind of similar. They're not like the full thing yet, but they're leading to it. So it's kind of like, the English, one of the reasons I chose this English word in this translation is that like a precursor to someone isn't quite there yet, right? What would you say? Usually we think about it like a thinker who is a precursor to someone else's thought. They've kind of got an idea. It's not completely developed. And then some later thinker comes along and develops it completely. So it's similar here. This is like taking the qualities of the path of seeing, but it's not completely developed. It's not the path of seeing yet, but it's coming there. So it's similar and it's leading to it. So the four precursors to realization. So the essence of these is that they must be produced by meditation. They must be, they're progenitor, right? They're primarily progenitor. They're the progenitor that is produced by meditation. In other words, at this stage, of course, you do, when you're on the path, when you're not sitting in meditation, you would do some listening and contemplating, but the actual meditation, the actual path of joining, the meditation, has the progenitor produced by meditation. So all four of the precursors to clear realization must be produced by meditation. They do not arise from listening or contemplating. So that's the general common features. Now they also have specific features of them. And so these are, it's like 5 topics. The distinctions of the level. Are they in desire or form or formless? Where are they? The distinctions of support. That means male or female, who. Distinctions in how they are forfeited. Distinctions in the qualities and the distinctions in the family. Family is like potential. So first we talk about the distinctions of level. So the 4 precursors to realization can be on these levels, as it says in the verse, on not unable, special, and the dhyanas, 2 below perhaps. So they can be on the level of not unable, which is a preparation for the first dhyana. They can be on the level of special, which is like a special first dhyana. There's a first dhyana and then there's a special. It's a little bit better. It's kind of in between the first and second dhyanas. And then there are the dhyanas. This means the 4 dhyanas. That's 6 levels. Now, another master named Goshaka also says that they can be on, that 2 of them can be on the lower level of desire. So to read the commentary, these are on the levels of the preparation for the first dhyana, not unable. They're on the special dhyana and the 4 actual practices of the dhyanas, or 6 levels. These 6 levels, when you talk about 6 levels of dhyana, these are the levels that are talked about often in this book. So these are the 6 levels. So as these are definitely contained in those 6 levels and not on any other, there are no precursors to clear realization on the levels of the formless. That means when you're training to go to the path of seeing, then you're not, even if you have already learned if you're already become able to do the formless meditations, you don't do them on the path of joining. On the path of joining, you do these 6 you do the meditations of these 6 levels. And the reason for that is because clear realization is the practice of the path of seeing, which is not present on the paths of the on the levels of the formless. So you can't have the path of seeing in the formless realm. So why can't you have the path of seeing in the formless realm or in the formless absorptions, the 4 formless meditations? The reason that there is no path of seeing there that is on the formless absorptions or in the formless realm is because the path of seeing focuses on the desire realm. Because first you see suffering in the desire realm. We'll get to that later this morning. At first, it focuses on the desire realm. And the formless realm does not focus on the desire realm. It's too far away. Just too much difference. It's like the formless level, the formless absorptions, the mind is really, really subtle. The desire realm is really, really coarse. It's just too far away. We can't see them. They can't see us. Basically, that's what it's saying. They're too far away. Also, when you're on the formless realm, it's just too nice. It's too pleasant. How can you think about suffering when you're on the formless realm? There's no suffering to look at. Well, I suppose that would also pertain to the form realm, but it's closer and it's easy and it's possible to be on the form realm and still perceive the desire realm. So you can do it on the levels of dhyana. So in the tradition of Venerable Goshaka, the 2, warmth and peak, that's the first 2 of the 4 precursors of clear realization, are also below in the desire realm. And the word perhaps indicates that this is a separate tradition. So it's not the main tradition of the Kashmiri tradition. It's a separate tradition in which those 2 would be on 7 levels. So warmth, and if you take this position, you'd say that warmth and peak can also be on the desire realm, which would mean 7 levels. The same 6 of dhyana plus the level of desire for 7. In that case, since they could be supported on a level of desire, they wouldn't necessarily be meditation produced. Because on the level of desire, when you're in the desire realm, you can't actually produce meditation. You can't really have stable meditation. Here, the understanding of meditation here is like the equipoise of the preparations or of the jhanas or the absorptions of the formless realm. In the desire realm, the mind is just too unstable. It's just hard. It's just not resting evenly. Okay, so that's the distinctions of the level. So now we've come to the distinctions of support. Support of desire realm in women gain supreme dharma on both supports. So here, the first three can be newly produced in those men and women of the three continents who have not previously had them. So when you gain them anew for the first time, then that means that you can, either a man can do it or a woman can do it. It doesn't matter. Or I suppose boys and girls, male or female. On the three continents, that means not in the northern continent of unpleasant sound because, oh, I'm not showing my screen, and I'm sorry. I went through all that. I was talking here on the, I somehow turned it off, excuse me. Anyways, support, they're on the support of the desire realm, and women gain supreme dharma on both supports. So on the desire realm, so the first three, it says in the commentary, can be newly produced in those men and women of the three continents who have not previously had them. So these means of the four continents where humans live, not in the northern unpleasant sound, because it's just too pleasant and you can't develop the path of seeing there. So if you can't do the path of seeing, you can't do the preparations for it either. Those that have already arisen can become manifest among the gods. In other words, if you achieve like the level of warmth, and then you die, but you've been virtuous, so you're reborn as a god, in the desire realm god, then you can also practice them there. They can become manifest, that it means that you can actually practice them there. And the fourth can be produced among the gods. So the fourth of these, the supreme dharma, can also be produced by the gods. So they all have the support of the desire realm. So they're all based. So you have to have a body of the desire realm. Your mind is in one of the six absorptions of the dhyana realm, but your body is a desire realm body, right? Because we have to distinguish between the dhyana, the meditations, and the results, the form realm. You're in the desire realm, practicing the dhyana meditation. So that's in general. And women can gain supreme dharma on both male and female supports. Well, what does this mean? Well, what this means, this goes back to something, and this is just a totally different worldview than we have these days, based on being in a really sexist society. And the point that is made here is that once you have achieved the level of supreme worldly dharma, you're never going to be born in a position where it's difficult to practice dharma. You're always going to be born someplace where it's easy, where you will definitely be able to practice the dharma. That means you have to be born in a situation where you have some control. So in ancient India, as you all know, there was no control. People, women it was a terrible situation for women. A few women managed to go forth and become nuns, but by and large, girls were married off when they were 12 or 13 or 14 and had very little choice in life. It was a very difficult, so if you were born in female, it's difficult to actually be able to practice the Dharma, just externally. So, because if you're going to be a noble being, if you're going to practice the Dharma, you need to be born on a support, with a body that is conducive to Dharma practice. They say that you couldn't be born as a woman. Now, the other thing that is important to remember here is that at that time, they had no conception that society would change. When you read the literature, either the literature at the time of the Buddha, or even the literature from the middle of the first millennium, I'm not so certain about later. I haven't quite read as much of that specifically sort of literature as opposed to like, what do we say, instructions or something. They tell stories about past and future lives, about times in the future, the times of future Buddhas, the times of past Buddhas. And in all of those, they're teaching it as if there are 4 castes, and there are kings, there are ministers, and that that men own their wives and children. So boys and girls are both owned by their fathers, and the wives are sort of chattel. And there's no consent. So their idea is that this is how it had always been for hundreds of thousands of years, and that this is how it would always be for hundreds of thousands of years. And so in that context, they thought, well, it's always going to be like that, so we need to achieve liberation. So if you're born as a woman, then it's difficult to practice the Dharma in that sort of society. So in this day and age, we are in a different society where actually it seems like it's frankly easier for women to practice Dharma. More women are able to practice Dharma than more men. There's more societal pressure on men, particularly in some cultures. In East Asian cultures, there's a lot of pressure on men that you have to go out and get a job and be a breadwinner, get a good job and be professional and all this stuff. It makes it hard for men who want to practice the Dharma. I've spoken with many men who've had this issue. So that's less of an issue among people of European descent, but it's still a bit of an issue. So it seems these are days where it's like actually easier to practice Dharma as a woman. So I would wonder if this would be taught differently were Vasubandhu and the Buddha in a society similar to what we're in now. So when it's saying that that it's difficult for women to practice in Dharma, that I think is a teaching that is based upon the time and the culture, the time and the place. And it's not necessarily an ultimate teaching here. Basically, when it's saying that when we say in this and another text that women are going to be reborn as men, it means that women would be reborn in a position where they can practice the Dharma. Okay. So the point here is that women, as it says here in the text, I'll just highlight where we are temporarily. So women can gain, oops, I hit the wrong button. The women can gain supreme Dharma on both male and female supports. Now, how this works. So there's a woman who's meditating. She goes through the paths of the 4 stages of warmth. She goes through the first 3 stages of warmth, peak, forbearance. She gets to the end of forbearance. She reaches supreme Dharma. She gains supreme Dharma on a female support. Then, because it only lasts an instant, then she moves right through the path of seeing. She becomes a stream enter, a noble being. And then in her next lifetime, she's going to be reborn. She passes away before she attains arhatship. So she passes away, and then she's reborn, and she's going to be reborn in a position where she's going to practice Dharma. So that means that she's going to be, according to this culture and this time, reborn as a man. I'm saying it in kind of a quotation. So if she's then reborn as a man, well, because she's on a different support, when you're on a different support, then you regain it. She still has it in her mind, but her body is different, so she regains it as on a male support, either a human man, or a male god, or a male formless realm god, or whatever. So that's what this is saying. Now, men can only gain it with a male support because they attain a non-atalytic cessation of becoming female. In other words, when you get through to the point of the level of supreme worldly Dharma, you're only going to be reborn in positions where you can practice the Dharma, and those are, so they thought, male. So that's the point here. And so this is just a difference of ancient culture and so forth. It's a question as to whether this really applies in this day. The point, I think, is that once you get to a certain stage in your Dharma practice, a certain level of realization, then you're only going to be reborn in positions where you can practice the Dharma. And if you're reborn in a sexist society where women can't practice the Dharma, then you'll be born male. If you're born in a sexist society where men can't practice Dharma, then you'll be reborn female. And if you're born in a society where both can practice Dharma, then you'll be reborn either, I guess. That's my interpretation of this. Of course, though, I'm not omniscient, so I can't say exactly what it means, but this is my guess for what it means. Excuse me, I just hit the thing twice. Okay. So we gain those 4 in that way. But we can also lose them, and there are 2 ways you can lose them. The one, and the main way is, or one way is that when you get to a new level, and then you kind of lose everything you had on, or you forfeit what you had on the previous level. And the other way would be by losing it, by regressing, just going back. So the first one is, so distinctions in how they're formatted has two topics, how the nobles forfeit them and how ordinary individuals forfeit them. So how the nobles forfeit them. So the nobles forfeit them when leaving a level. So what this says is that the nobles forfeit them, the passive joining attained on the support of a particular level, when they leave a level and are reborn in a higher. So for example, when you develop the path of seeing as a human in the desire realm, then you go through the paths of joining and seeing, and you achieve dhyana meditation. You die before you become an arhat, but you are reborn in the form realm. So that's leaving it. So you forfeit the path of joining when you go to the higher realm. Now the reason is because the roots of virtue are greatly increased by the path of seeing. So because the roots of virtue are greatly increased by the path of seeing, and unlike ordinary individuals, they do not forfeit them through regression or death. So once you've achieved the path of seeing, there's no regression from that. And you have such great virtue that you don't lose them at the time of death, as an ordinary individual might. So, or as an ordinary individual does. So how ordinary individuals forfeit them is the next topic, and there are 2 points, the actual and an elaboration. So the actual is non-nobles at death, the first two by regressing two. So if you're not a noble being, in other words, if you die while you're still on the path of joining, which would happen on in the stage of warmth and peak, and in the first 2 parts of the level of forbearance, because they have continuum. If you died at that point, then you forfeit it. You have to kind of get it, and you have to develop it anew in your next lifetime. And the first 2 can also you can lose them by regressing. If you just don't, you get them, you get some warmth, and then you go on a vacation, and you stop meditating. You kind of lose it. And after your meditation, you have your vacation, then you kind of get distracted by other things. You lose it. That's just how it's going to happen, right? So the first 2, the warmth and the peak, can be lost by regressing too. So non-noble ordinary individuals who are detached, that means when they have achieved the form and formless realm, or detached, forfeit when they transmigrate from one level to be reborn in a higher at death. So if you gained it as a human in the desire realm, you achieve the dhyana meditation, you develop these the path of joining. When you are reborn in form, then you forfeit it. And you also, it's because of being reborn in a different level, and also by discarding your likeness. That is sort of the continuum of this body. Those not detached also forfeit them by discarding their likeness, even when not transmigrating to a new level. So when you're in a life, your likeness is like the continuum of your body and such, that is sort of like you. It's similar the whole time, a continuum of similarity. So when you forfeit that at the time of death, because you're moving on to a new body, a new likeness, then you also forfeit them at that point. The first 2, the warmth and peak, are forfeited during the period of an ordinary individual by regressing too, through the afflictions that are incompatible with them. So if you any of the afflictions really, but in particular the ones like envy and anger and so forth. So even ordinary individuals cannot regress from forbearance or supreme dharma. So once you've got to forbearance, your meditation is pretty stable. There's no way you can regress. At supreme worldly dharma, your what do we say? At supreme worldly dharma, then then it's only an instant long. So there's not any time to die in it. You're definitely going onto the path of seeing. So the elaboration has 3 points. The particular is a forfeiture through death. The actual sees truth in this. So if you are on the path of a path of joining and the precursors of clear realization, on the actual practice of the first dhyana or the second or third or fourth, then you'll definitely see the truth in this lifetime. As the commentary says, someone who has produced the precursors to clear realization on the level of the actual practice of the first jhana will definitely see the truth in this very lifetime, because they have great revulsion. They have absolutely, they look at it. So you're sitting here in the desire realm, you've developed the first jhana, and you realize that this is much better than the desire realm is horrible. You don't want to ever go back to the desire realm. So you feel really strong revulsion, really strong wish for liberation. And so therefore, you're definitely going to see the truths in this lifetime. So the explanation of forfeiture through regression and death is for those not unable. So there is no contradiction. So if you're on the level of not unable, which is not actually the actual dhyanas, then there's the possibility that you could regress. But if you're on the actual, then you aren't going to regress before you see the truth. So once you've lost them, are you just done? Are you ever going to be able to see them again? So if one regresses, they're gained anew. So if you lose them, if you have the warmth or the peak and you lose them, then when you regain them, you're going to gain them anew. So this is the, so it's not like you regain something you had before. It's like you have to develop them all over again. So if one who has regressed from the precursors to clear realization later attains them again, one gains them anew, like the vows of liberation. It's like with the vows of liberation. If you lose your vows of individual liberation, then you have to retake them in order to get them again. You can't just sort of read them. You have to actually retake them. So it's similar with the 4 precursors of realization. If you regress, then you have to kind of start over again with them. So one does not reattain the same ones previously forfeited because they're something that is unfamiliar and created through effort. You have to work at it. When you regress from them, when you're on them, you have familiarity, but when you regress, you don't. So you have to work at it to develop them. And so it's important to do this. And so I'd also like to just actually take a moment to ask those of you who are watching on Zoom, if you could, some of you have your cameras on and some of you don't. And sometimes I end up seeing only people who don't have their cameras on. And it's helpful for me to see people who have their cameras on. So if it's possible, I'd like to ask you to turn on your cameras. It's more helpful for me when I'm teaching because I can actually look like I'm staring at not just a blank screen, but I'm actually looking at images of people. And also I think it helps you be more mindful of your conduct and so forth as you are listening. So if your camera is not on, please turn it on. Okay. That is that. Okay, where was I? Here we are. So the essence of the 2 types of forfeiture, both forfeitures are non-possession. So what are the natures of forfeiture and regression, you ask? All loss of attainment is called forfeiture, and in particular, forfeiture because of an incompatible affliction is called regression. So you can lose these, and you can lose them in 2 ways. One is like, not so bad. It's like when you're going up onto a higher level. That's not a bad way of forfeiting. It's just going on. Then there's the difficult way, or the hard way, which when you have the incompatible affliction, one of the entanglers or envy or something like that. And that is regression. So both forfeitures are in essence non-possession. In other words, you don't have them anymore. And the reason you don't have them is you lost. It's non-attainment from forfeiting the attainment. You no longer have it, so you've lost it. So that's regression or forfeiture. Okay? So the distinctions of qualities. When peak is gained, roots can't be severed. Forbearance goes not to low realms. So when you gain the peak, that is the second, if you regress, One might commit heinous misdeeds and go to the lower realms, but the roots of virtues cannot be severed. So what are the roots of virtue? These roots of virtue were taught in chapter 4. Roots of virtue in particular means when you have the, what do we say? Roots of virtue are in particular when you when they're severed when you develop a wrong view and you are unable to really, what do we say? You don't believe in karmic cause and effect. And then once that happens, then it's hard to, you can't actually accumulate any virtues. The root is severed. Essentially, this is saying that you're not going to develop that sort of a wrong view that will cause you to sever the roots of virtue. And the reason for this is because you have attained sincere faith in the three jewels through training in their qualities. So you have sincere faith in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and therefore you're going to pay attention to their, you're going to consider and, what do we say? You're going to pay attention and, what do you say, respect what they say. So when lesser forbearance is attained, there also is the attainment of the freedom of not going to lower realms. So once you've achieved the state of, even the first part of the level of forbearance, then you're never going to be reborn in a lower realm. When greater forbearance is attained, one also attains freedom from being reborn in certain modes of birth, births or bodies and so forth. So this means that you're not going to be reborn as an animal, you're not going to be reborn as a naga, not as a maharaga, not as a kinnara, not as any of these sorts of spirits. You're just not, you're not going to be born from an egg. You won't be born from warmth and moisture. All of those sorts of, you just won't be reborn from any of, in any of those circumstances. Okay, so then there are distinctions in the family. So the distinction in the family has 2 points. The families that can change. 2 can withdraw from the learner's family and become Buddhas. Others, the third. So they're different families. And in general, we can talk about them as being, there's the family of Buddhas. Those people who are headed for Buddhahood. They're the family of what I translated here as self-Buddhas, but is more commonly used to use the Sanskrit word Pratyeka Buddhas. And the family of learners. So these are the people who are going to go on and become arhats. Now, there are actually many different types of the learners, but if we consider them all, just those 3 types of families right now. So among those, 2 can withdraw from the learner's family. So if you've achieved the level of warmth or peak, those 2 levels, then you can change from the learner's family to be one of the other families. Develop the mind of great enlightenment and become Buddhas. But once you've achieved enlightenment, you can't. The reason you can't is because when you've achieved, once you've achieved forbearance, you can't. So above there, they're not. Above there isn't. So the others is the third. So as it says here in the commentary, those who have attained warmth and peak and withdraw from the learner's family of listeners, develop the mind of great enlightenment and become Buddhas. But those who have attained in forbearance cannot, because from then on there is no birth in the lower realms. So how do you train to become a Buddha? By going through all the hardships over 3 uncalculable eons, and that includes being reborn in the lower realms. But a bodhisattva takes their birth there to benefit other beings. So the bodhisattva does this. If you've achieved forbearance, you can't be reborn there, so you can't really do the bodhisattva activity anymore, they say. So those other than the Buddha, the self-Buddhas, on the 3rd stage of the path of joining or forbearance can also change because they do not go to lower realms even for others' benefit. So I think you can change to become a Pratyeka Buddhas on the 3rd level. Once Supreme Dharma has attained, there's no changing family. So that's if you're a learner. Now, the families that cannot change, the families of the Buddha and the Pratyeka Buddhas cannot change. As it says in the next text, it says, the teacher and rhino all on one seat and Dhyan's end until awakening. So the teacher, the Buddha, and the rhino-like self-Buddhas. So rhino-like, it can be a name of 2 things. It can either be a general term for Pratyeka Buddhas, which is the meaning that we have here, or it can be one of the 3 types of Pratyeka Buddhas. But here we mean a general rhino-like self-Buddhas. or Pratyeka Buddhas. They cannot change family at any time after reaching warmth, because all the paths from the precursors to clear realization arise on one seat and only on dhyana's upper end, the fourth dhyana, until awakening to enlightenment. So this is like a big difference between the foundation vehicle and the great vehicle. So what it's saying is that, like with the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama spent 3 uncountable eons in the path of accumulation. And when he took his last birth as the son of King Shododana, he was an ordinary individual. He was on the path of accumulation. And he was kind of searching around, not really knowing, looking for things, and he didn't really quite know what he was looking for. He had a lot of merit because of his 3 eons of accumulating merit, but he hadn't actually achieved, what do we say? He hadn't actually achieved any stable qualities yet. So then he went through all the austerities, and he finally decided that he was going to sit down under the Bodhi tree. He sat down there. He entered the 4th dhyana and sat there, and in one night went through all 4 stages of the path of the path of joining, plus the path of seeing and the path of meditation, and achieved Buddhahood. So he went through 4 of the paths of joining, seeing, meditation, and to no more learning, all on one seat. This is different than we hear in the Mahayana. In the Mahayana, we say that the Buddha spent 1 incalculable eon as an ordinary individual on the paths of accumulation and joining. Then it sees emptiness at the beginning of the 2nd incalculable eons, and then travels to the first 7 bodhisattva levels, and then for the next uncountable eons, traverses the 3 pure bodhisattva levels, achieves enlightenment, and then sends an emanation here. That's the Mahayana explanation, right? But in the Great Exposition, they say, no, the Buddha is an ordinary individual just on the path of accumulation until that last day, the evening before he achieved enlightenment in the morning. So now that's the description of the precursors to clear realization. Well, before then, what leads to that? Well, there are preliminaries. Before that, the precursor to freedom. The precursor to freedom, or sometimes you could say, I think I said freedom here to fit it in the verse, the precursor to liberation. It's that which leads to liberation. And this is the path of accumulation. It's another name for the path of accumulation. We also, in the last chapter, in chapter 4, we also saw the term precursors to merit. Those are the activities that lead to rebirth in the higher realm. And we have these precursors to liberation that lead to liberation, and then the precursors to clear realization. There are the 3 types of precursors. So here we're talking about the second, the precursors to liberation or freedom, which are the path of accumulation. The swiftest in 3 lives are freed. So if you're really fast, then you can go from the path of accumulation to arhatship in 3 lifetimes. That's the swiftest. From listening and contemplation, 3 karmas are propelled by humans. So the commentary reads, do the precursors to clear realization arise right from the beginning, or must something precede them, you ask? Before the precursor to clear realization, you must produce the virtuous fruits of the precursor to freedom. So this is the path of accumulation. You have to do this first. You can't just go straight from the beginning and skip to the path of joining, in other words. So the absolute swiftest of all in 3 lifetimes are liberated. So it takes 3 lifetimes. For example, just in one plants a seed, and then the fruit forms and the fruit ripens. Well, I think there's another step. You plant a seed, the tree grows, and then the fruit ripens, right? In the first lifetime, you produce the virtuous roots, the precursor of liberation. So first you have that in one lifetime. Then the second lifetime, the precursor to realization. And in the third, you produce the noble path, the paths of seeing and meditation and no more learning. So the being gradually develops, rightens, and is completely liberated in this dharma. So it takes 3 lifetimes for the fast of all people. So the precursors to liberation arise from listening and contemplation. They do not arise from meditation. Why don't they arise from meditation? Well, because you're on the path of accumulation. You haven't really got it yet. You develop the meditation by the end of the path of liberation. They are primarily karma of mind. In other words, primarily working with your mind, but there's also karma of speech because you're reciting prayers, making aspirations. And there are also the karmas of body, because you can have like the lay precepts and so forth, which is a physical thing. And also when you're speaking, then you can move your body and you can prostrate and circumambulate and all that. So they are also karma of speech. They are the three karmas of body, speech, and mind. They are propelled by humans on the three continents only, not by others who lack either full knowing, that is prajna, or world weariness. So you can only have them when you're in a kind of a situation that's bad enough to make you think that you want to get out of samsara. If your situation is too good, if you're in too cushy a situation, you're just not going to figure it out. So for that reason, they are only among humans of the three continents. The gods' lifetimes are too nice and they get distracted. The lower realms are just too miserable and you don't have enough intelligence or enough progeny, so you're not able to develop them there. So those are the three precursors to liberation, or the precursors to liberation. So at this point now, we've come to this section on the we've come to this section on what is it? We have come to this section on the precursors to clear realization. So when we're talking about the precursors to clear realization, I think it's going to be easier if I give you kind of like a Western style presentation first, and then we go through the text. Otherwise, we're going to be looking at the text, and it's the first time you've heard 16 moments. Well, I've been saying these, but we're talking about the 16 moments of clear realization, Dharma forbearance, subsequent forbearance, Dharma knowing, subsequent knowing. There are all these strange terms, and you just don't know what they're talking about, what they are. So we're going to go through with a little bit of a presentation of them first. So here we go. Where did it go? So here we are. So the 16 moments of clear realization are the 16 moments where you can, where you see the 16 moments by which you develop the clear realization of the four truths. Now, clear realization means like you're really seeing them. You're really seeing the Four Noble Truths. So we see each of the Four Noble Truths in order, but you don't see them all immediately in just a single essence, a single instant. It takes a few moments to go through them. And so actually it takes 4 moments to go through each truth. And the way it happens is at first you're looking at the suffering of the desire realm. And as you look at the suffering of desire realm, you go through the path of joining, you get to the supreme worldly dharma, and you're at the supreme worldly dharma. So then what do you have to do then? Well, so what do you do when you're on supreme worldly dharma? You're focusing on that. Then there comes to a point where you actually are able to bear seeing the truths, and you actually see the truth. So that's this stage of seeing suffering directly in desire. So before that, on the path of joining, you've had a conceptual idea of the truth of suffering, but you haven't actually seen it. It's like the difference between kind of knowing about, you've got your durian fruit there. You can look at it and you can smell it, but you don't know what it tastes until you put it in your mouth, right? It's different. And that's only when you put it in your mouth and actually experience the flavor. So it's similar. You can have an idea about the suffering of the desire realm. You can understand conceptually that everything is impermanent, suffering, selfless, and empty, but you haven't actually seen it. So then there comes a point where you're actually seeing it, and that's the first moment. And what that does is that first moment, you're seeing the truth. Then there are all the kernels of suffering in the desire realm: desire, anger, delusion, doubt, pride, and the 5 types of views. When you see that, those are all discarded. So that's the first moment of the path of the 16 moments of clear realization. When you see the suffering of desire realm, and that eliminates the kernels. So then what we call that is Dharma forbearance of suffering. Now, the reason it's called Dharma forbearance is like being able to patient, being able to bear with something. Before this point, you haven't been quite able to bear the idea of it. It's like with your durian. With your durian, while it's sitting on the table before you've eaten it, just smells kind of foul. And even if you know, everyone tells you, oh, this is great, this is the most delicious fruit, it smells foul. And everyone tells us, so you're willing to eat it, but you don't actually know. And you're still a little bit hesitant until you put it in your mouth. And of course, durian's a bad example, because when you put it in your mouth, some people just immediately spit it out and can't stand it, and other people just really love it. But until it's in your mouth, if you're one of those people who actually likes durian, when you put it in your mouth, you realize it smells terrible, but it tastes great. And you're no longer afraid of eating durian. In fact, you have the opposite problem of wanting to eat too much. So that's why it's called forbearance. It's like before you see the truth, you're not quite ready to bear with it. But once you see it, you no longer have any fear. So it's forbearance. You can put up with seeing the truth of suffering. You realize, actually, it's better to know. Now, actually, this term is actually the Dharma forbearance of knowing suffering is like the full term. So they kind of shorten it by saying the Dharma forbearance of suffering. What you're able to put up with is knowing suffering, knowing that all defiled phenomena, all defiled composites are impermanent, suffering, selfless, and empty. Knowing that. So that's knowing that suffering. You're able to put up with that. So it's called that. So when we call it Dharma forbearance, it's sort of like the way it's just described in the auto commentary. It's sort of like saying, like a fruit tree. You have a tree you plant the tree in order to get the fruit. So you have the forbearance in order to know suffering. So this is the first moment. You see the suffering, abandon the kernels. This is happening at the same time. I think my arrows, actually, as I look at it now, the arrow is a little bit misleading because it implies that there's a sequence. Actually, seeing suffering and abandoning kernels are simultaneous. And it's called the Dharma forbearance of suffering. So then what comes after that? What's the second moment? The second moment is when you recognize suffering and desire. So you recognize it. You have seen it, and then you recognize it. The second moment. And at that point, you've already abandoned the kernel. So in that second moment, you are liberated from it, right? So the second moment of this recognizing the suffering is desire, and you're liberated from that. And this is what we call Dharma knowing of suffering. So here, this is the pattern that you have. First, you have the forbearance where you can put up with it, and then you have the knowing, and that knowing is like recognizing. And then in the next moment, the third moment is seeing suffering in form and formless. And what this does, has the same function as seeing the suffering directly in desire. You abandon the kernels of form and formless for seeing suffering. So these are the 9 of the of each of the 2 upper realms: the desire, delusion, doubt, desire, delusion, doubt, pride, and the five wrong views of seeing seeing the suffering in the form and formless. Now, but here it's called subsequent forbearance of suffering. Now, subsequent is kind of like it's a hard one to do. It literally does mean later, jesun, jeshe, or the Sanskrit anu. So it's later. So in the way, what this is like, first you're in the desire realm. When you're like you're in the desire, you're focusing on the suffering of desire, you see them, that's dharma forbearance of suffering, you know them, that's recognizing, or the dharma knowing of suffering. And then you realize, just as it is suffering in the desire realm, it is also, these are also true in the form and formless realm. Now, you're not looking directly at them. It's kind of like inferential, but it's knowing. It's sort of seeing, it's kind of inferential seeing. It's not directly seeing. It's not really even seeing, I guess. But it's the subsequent forbearance of suffering. And then once you have that, then you go to the next stage, which is you recognize it. So we've got these 4 stages, where first you see the suffering. That is what we call dharma forbearance of suffering. Then you recognize suffering and desire. That's dharma knowing of suffering. Then you see suffering in form and formless, and that's subsequent forbearance of suffering. And then you recognize the suffering above in the higher 2 realms. I kind of didn't have enough, I suppose I didn't. Anyways, in the 2 higher realms, that's what I meant by above. And that's the subsequent knowing of suffering. So you've got these 4 moments for each, 4 similar moments for each of them. You've got dharma forbearance, dharma knowing, subsequent forbearance, and subsequent knowing. So for the truth of suffering, that's 4, right? Then we have the next truth is the truth of origin. The truth of origin has the 4 aspects of cause, origin, condition, and production. That's seeing that the karma and afflictions are causes and origins, conditions that form things, that they produce suffering. So first, again, you have the same stages. First, you see origin directly in desire. So first, you're in the desire realm, so you're actually seeing it in the desire realm. That eliminates the kernels, the afflictions of the desire realm for this, that are discards of seeing the truth of origin. And that we also call dharma forbearance of origin, right? So the same term, just changing the name of the truth. And then once you've seen that, then you recognize that in the next moment. That's recognizing origin in desire. So that is like liberation from the kernels, and that's the dharma knowing of origin. And then again, you see this for the higher, for the higher realm. So you're seeing origin in form and formless, and that is the subsequent forbearance of origin, and it abandons all of the kernels. And then you have recognizing the origin, the truth of the origin in the higher realms, which is liberation from all the kernels, and subsequent knowing of origin. So you've got the same 4 steps for the truth of origin. So 4 for suffering, 4 for origin, and guess what? The same 4 for cessation. So you see the characteristics of the cessation as being peace, and cessation, resplendence, emancipation in the desire realm. That's dharma forbearance of cessation. Then you recognize that is dharma knowing of cessation. And you see that for the higher realms, that subsequent forbearance of cessation, and then you recognize it for above, and that is the subsequent knowing of cessation. And then again, it is exactly the same for the path. So again, these same 4. And now I've got something. It's hard to tell what's going on here on my screen. Sorry, you all can't see this, but I can. Where am I? Yeah. Okay. So that's seeing the truth of the path. Now, so in that way, we have 4 for suffering, 4 for origin, 4 for cessation, and 4 for the path. That is 16 moments. So what do we have here? These are the 16 moments of clear realization. So you have 4 for each truth. That is 16, right? So this is the process of clear realization. This comes after you've gone through that, you've got that 1 moment of supreme worldly dharma, and then you start right in with the dharma forbearance of suffering, which is number 1. Then you do the dharma knowing of suffering, that's 2. Then subsequent forbearance of suffering, that's 3. Then subsequent knowing of suffering, and so forth, all the way up to the subsequent knowing of the path, the 16th moment. And these are moments. This is going by really quick. It's often compared to a wheel spinning. So the wheel going by really quickly. And so it's like you start on this as just like one whole process. So in 16 moments, probably in terms of time, it's unclear whether it's talking about the shortest possible instance of time, the indivisible moments of time, or whether these are what we'd call the moment of an action. But it's definitely a short period of time. It's like you're going through this whole process in a few seconds at most, probably. So now, when we think about it, when we were speaking about the perfect knowings, we talked about how there's the differences between the paths of no obstacles and the path of liberation, right? We talked about 4 paths. We talked about the path of joining, the path of no obstacles, path of liberation, and the distinctive path for discarding the antidotes. And so the path of joining is like getting ready to join. You've got the path of no obstacles, which is where you actually have the antidote that discards the obstacles. Then you have the path of liberation, which is where you're freed, and then the distinctive path where you get some distance from it. We spoke about this in the 5th chapter. So here, each of these moments, which are of those 4 types of paths? Well, the first one, Dharma forbearance of suffering, is a path of no obstacles. That means that it's like nothing can stop it. Nothing's going to get in the way. There's no interruption. In fact, actually, in another translation, the translation by Ian Coughlin of the Chim Abhidharma, he translated as the uninterrupted paths, and that might be a better translation. I just need to consider that. I haven't got around to thinking about that too much yet, but that's a point that needs to be considered. But at any rate, there's no obstacles, nothing stopping, and no interruptions to it on that moment. It's just a moment, and then the next moment is the path of liberation, where you are definitely freed. Then we have the moment of subsequent forbearance. That's also a path of no obstacles. And then the 4th moment is a path of liberation. So you're kind of going back and forth between developing the antidote, recognizing that's liberation. Developing the antidote, that's no obstacles, and recognizing it, that's liberation. Kind of going back and forth between these 2 stages. Or, the Dharma forbearance and the Dharma knowing. So all 16 moments of these are undefiled. These are undefiled cognitions. And for the individual who has achieved them, it's like the first time that you're having undefiled cognition. Before that, you've been an ordinary individual and your cognition has been necessarily defiled. Then when you achieve this state, then you become a noble being. These are undefiled cognitions. And the first moment, the Dharma forbearance of suffering, is the first undefiled moment. It's kind of an important moment. It's like you've made a big change. And so from that point on, you are a noble being. So instead of being called an ordinary individual, you are now an Arya, or a noble being. Another way that this is described in the sutras is that you are definitely on the way. This is a kind of idiomatic, shall we say, idiomatic way of translating this. The Sanskrit niyama avakranta. So like avakranta is basically like you're on the way. You've entered it. You're on the way. You're going. And niyama is like definitely. You're certainly on the way. And what are you on the way to? You're definitely on the way to arhatship, nirvana, liberation. So these 16 moments of clear realization, well, we've gone through the path of accumulation and we've gone through the path of joining. And so now we've got to the moments of clear realization. So what are they? Are they the path of seeing? Well, actually, the path of seeing means seeing the truth that you have not seen before. That means that the first 15 moments, you're seeing truths you have not seen before. So those first 15 moments, the 4 moments of the truth of suffering, the 4 moments of origin, the 4 moments of seeing cessation, and the first 3 moments of seeing the truth of the path are all seeing things that you haven't seen before. But when you get to the 16th moment, it's no longer the path of seeing. On the 16th moment, it's the path of meditation. Why? Because from that point on, you're meditating on things that you've already seen. In other words, when you get to the path of a subsequent forbearance, when you get to the moment of subsequent forbearance of path, you're seeing the truths of the higher realms. That's the last set of truth that you need to see. And from then on, it's just meditation. So the first 15 moments are the path of seeing. And that 16th moment is the first moment of the path of meditation. Okay, so that's kind of an overview of the path of seeing, or the 16 moments of clear realization. So these 16 moments that you follow through. So I'm looking at the time. I thought about going through the text that goes through this, but I think I'm going to hold off on that text until our next class on Sunday. And then we can, because this gives you a chance, so you can sort of let it sink in, maybe review it if you'd like or not. You can let it sink in over 48 hours or 46 hours, and then you can hear it again. But I thought that if you have an idea about this, then the text is actually pretty clear. If you have no idea what we're talking about and you're looking at the text and it's like, what is this talking about? Then it's difficult. So for that reason, I thought that I would go through them in this way. So what do we say? Are there any questions this morning? Yes, lots. We'll send by email. Okay, that's fine. Good. So if that is that we have so many questions that we have to do them by email, that is excellent. And we will resume on Sunday. So now let us go back to dedicate the merit. So you get to look at this one more time. Maybe before we dedicate the merit, I'll just go through one more time, just to make it clear, because the more times you hear it, the easier it is. You've gone through the path of seeing, you've got to the supreme worldly Dharma, you're just about ready, and then the moments of clear realization happen. It's this really fast process where first you see suffering in the desire realm. That is the moment of Dharma forbearance of suffering. Then you know it. You recognize it and know it. That's Dharma knowing of suffering. Dharma here, when you see the ones that say Dharma, that means in the desire realm. Then you have then you realize that just as it's suffering in the desire realm, it's also suffering in the higher realms. That's subsequent forbearance. And then you know it, that subsequent knowing. So subsequent means the two higher realms. Then you have the same Dharma forbearance of origin, then Dharma, then you see them, you have Dharma forbearance of origin, you're seeing the truth of the origin in the desire realm, then you know it, that's the Dharma knowing of origin. Then you realize it's the same in the higher realms, that's the subsequent forbearance of origin, and then you know it. That's subsequent knowing of origin. Then the subsequent, then you have the Dharma for cessation. You see the cessation, you see the truth of cessation in the desire realm. Then that's the Dharma forbearance of cessation. Then you know it, that is Dharma forbearance of cessation. Then you realize the two higher realms are the same. That is subsequent forbearance of cessation. And then you know that is subsequent knowing of liberation. You're seeing more and more. Then you see the path in the desire realm. That is Dharma forbearance of path. And then you know it. That is Dharma forbearance of path. That is Dharma knowing of path. Then you see it that it's just as it is suffering, or just as it's the path in the lower realms, so is it in the higher realms. And so you have the subsequent forbearance of the path. That point, you have completely seen all Four Noble Truths. So that is the final moment of the path of seeing, and then you know the suffering know the truth of path in the higher realms. That is liberation, and the first moment of the path of meditation. So that's just a review. So now, please let us have our dedicate the merit of teaching and listening to the Dharma to the benefit of all sentient beings. Oh, by this merit may we attain omniscience, defeat the enemy, wrongdoing, and free all beings swiftly from the ocean of existence, churned by great waves of birth, age, sickness, and death. Sunam Dei Tam Jesi Pani Tomne Beranam Pamchete Keganachi Balong Chubai Sipetolero Kunyoro Sho Chancho Semcho Rimboche Make Panam Yedyuruchi Keba Nyamba Meba Yang Ne Gondru Pelwa Sho. May bodhicitta great and precious arise in those who have not roused it, never weakening in those who have. May it grow ever stronger and stronger. Okay. Thank you very much.